Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest installment of our Torah and Tech series, the Rabbi Dr. Joel Hochman Torah and Technology series. So certainly I want to begin by acknowledging the presence of Hannah Hochman and thanking her for her ongoing support of the series, and to remember fondly Rav Yoel Avraham ben David Pesach, whose original idea was the source of this series, and therefore we dedicate it to his memory. If there was ever a topic, we've covered a significant number of topics in this series. We've talked about lab-grown meat, mind-controlled electricity, the Human Genome Project, organ transplants and donations. But if there was ever a speaker to speak on the topic of the meeting of Torah and technology, it would be tonight's speaker. The Zomet Institute in Eretz Yisrael is really the center of Torah and technology, and of finding a way to merge Torah and technology. And really, as we consider our place in the world, another sign of the further integration of Torah in this world, and a further finding of a home for the teachings of Torah and the implementation of Torah in this world, which is ultimately the goal of the whole Judaism project, is to bring Torah and Jewish life and the teachings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to integrate them into human life. In fact, the first pasuk in the Torah is Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz, which tells us that the home for this Torah is to be here on earth. And so the fact that we have this developed to such an advanced degree, and where better than in Artseinu HaKadosha, is certainly a sign of the progress that Am Yisrael is making in our project to bringing Kedusha and Torah into the Gashmius of the world. Rabbi Binyamin Zimmerman, our speaker tonight, is a director of several venues aimed at advancing Jewish education through cutting-edge materials, addressing contemporary realities, and training a new generation of teachers. He serves as the educational director of the aforementioned Zomet Institute of Jewish Law and Technology. He's also a director of Mizrahi Musmachim for training Smicha students, and he's the co-director of the Mizrahi Matan Lapidot Educators Program for Women, director of Hesber.org, and his From the Source with Spirit series of books on Jewish studies are a curricula in classrooms used in more than 60 schools. And Rabbi Zimmerman is uniquely positioned to educate us and to inform us about the advances of our people in finding connection between Torah and cutting-edge technology. And so without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Rabbi Binyamin Zimmerman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What I'd like to do in the short amount of time that we have is really to focus on what it is that modifying technology is all about. We have various needs that in our day and age are met through technological advances. And when you think about it, these various needs present wonderful opportunities for us to be able to do things that were so difficult to do in the past, to be able to do quickly and the like. And the question becomes, well, 6 days of the week, we know how to use them. What about on the seventh day? What about on the day of Shabbos? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? Under what circumstances? One of the things that the Zomet Institute, which the rabbi mentioned, is all about, Zomet is a Hebrew word which means intersection. Zomet sees itself at the intersection of Torah and science, Torah and technology, which means taking all our scientific knowledge and all our Torah knowledge in order to understand how God wants us to live at this intersection. Because our understanding is clear that the Torah provides the wisdom for all time, which means that, as the sages say, hafoch ba v'kula ba, the more we look into the Torah, the more we'll find the wisdom for each and every generation. But the generation that we live in, the generation that rapidly advances technologically, and many of these technological advancements actually begin in the state of Israel, the question is, how can these be used in all different contexts to further the advancement of what the rabbi called the Jewish project? To be able to know how to use these things from a proper Jewish life. And when you think about it, one of the questions that will certainly arise is, if the Jewish state began in 1948, at a time when technology was rapidly advancing to be used in all different aspects of life, and questions would become regarding the security of the state, how to secure the state Jewishly, 24/7, including Shabbos. Medically, how are our hospitals going to run in the most ideal state 7 days of the week, including Shabbos? All these various questions were what led to the founding of the Zomet Institute by a man by the name of Rabbi Yisrael Rosen of blessed memory, who passed away about 1.5 years ago. But his vision was to be able to stand at this intersection, to be able to use this knowledge in order to maximize the use of technology in the most Jewish way possible, based upon the wisdom of the Torah, and being able to provide for the security, medical, and various other needs that we'll discuss in this short amount of time that we will discuss. So in order to understand exactly what we do in the Zomet Institute, one of the things that makes the Zomet Institute well known is, if you go in many different places, many in Israel, but you'll find throughout the world, a person goes to the Western Wall, to the Kotel on Shabbos. You go through security like any other day, but the security is not identical to every other day. You go through a special metal detector, which is made to be used on Shabbos. Who makes that metal detector? The Zomet Institute. You go to hospitals in Israel, and you'll find special outlets that are used specifically on Shabbos. Who makes them? The Zomet Institute. Zomet Institute uses its know-how in order to understand how to do these things. And the question becomes, what can be done? When is it appropriate? When is it necessary? Because at first glance, sometimes you might hear a little bit of cynicism. Sometimes I've heard people who've described, well, you work in the Zomet Institute, you're involved in modifying technology for use on Shabbos. So I assume you could tell me how to use my iPhone on Shabbos. So I'll tell you in all honesty, we don't work with iPhones. We only work with Android, with Samsung telephones. And the truth is, we do have something for Samsung phones. We have nothing for iPhones. But our goal is a very different goal. Our goal is to understand what Shabbos is all about and how God wants us to observe Shabbos in the age of technology. And that's what we're going to speak a little bit about, some of the things that we do, when we do it, and why we do it. Anyone who's interested, Mr. Sendik already came and asked in advance, but anyone who's interested and comes to the Zomet Institute, the Zomet Institute has a visitor center. There we show how we do things. We have whole technological setup to understand exactly how electrical appliances run and how and under what circumstances they can be modified. But we're going to focus on the why. Why do we do what we do? And what's the basis behind it? So first we're going to begin speaking a little bit about Shabbos. When we're thinking about Shabbos in the modern age, we're thinking about Shabbos as it has existed through all time. Not only from the time the Torah was given, but Shabbos is introduced to us all the way at the beginning of time. On the seventh day of creation, God sanctifies and blesses the day of Shabbos. And the day is transformed. But what's most interesting is the activities that the Torah tells us should not be performed on Shabbos are identical to the description of the activities that God ceased and God rested from on the seventh day. What is it that we do not do on Shabbat? The Torah says, Lo sase kol milacha. Do not perform any activity known as milacha. And understanding this term is going to help us be able to understand how to deal with technological advancement in all ages. So let's take a look at the first source, which are the verses from the seventh day of creation, something that we recite at the beginning of the Friday night Kiddush, the Friday night sanctification of the day. And it describes God completes the heavens and the earth on the seventh day. Vayichal Elokim bayom hashvi milachto asher asa. God completed his milacha, the underlined word which appears another 2 times in that short description of what Shabbos is all about. Shabbos is a day where God completed his malacha in advance. He rested from milacha. And later, at the time that the Jews are given the Torah, one of the 10 commandments is going to describe you Jews as well. On this day of the Sabbath, you are going to refrain from milacha. And therefore, it's essential for us to understand what this term milacha is all about. What exactly do we refrain from on Shabbos? The term milacha is often translated as work. But work is not really an adequate definition for what we refrain from on Shabbos. Why? Firstly, there's a separate Hebrew word. The word avodah is the Hebrew word for work, which means that milacha is something different. But also, when we think of God's creating the world, God was the first to rest from milacha on Shabbat, which means, what did God rest from? So what did he do during those 6 days of creation? He created and transformed in the physical realm. He created the physical universe. And therefore, milacha means physical creativity. If you look at the bottom source on page 1, you will see that Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch describes the word milacha in this context. The word milacha, he writes, appears 200 times in Scripture and never once refers to physical labor. It is not physical labor that we refrain from on the Shabbos. The milacha, which is forbidden on Shabbat, is conceived as the execution of an intelligent purpose by the practical skill of man, i.e., any production, creation, or transforming an object for human purposes, but not physical exertion. The definition of melacha is creative, transformative physical activity. Because we, like God, throughout the 6 days of creation, God handed over creation to mankind. God created a world in a perfected state of imperfection. A perfected state of where God handed over the baton to mankind. And he said, now it's your turn to advance, to create, but all within the context of Shabbos. 6 days a week we perform milacha. We create and transform in the physical realm. On the 7th day, we, like God, take the day that God has sanctified and blessed, and we rest from milacha. We rest from this physical creative activity in order to have a day of spiritual creativity. A day where we will be able to focus on the bigger things in life that the routine of the 6 days do not allow us to perform. And the reason this is so significant is because this is essentially going to require us to ask anything new that comes into existence. We're going to always begin with one question. Does this appliance or activity, does this involve physical creativity? If it involves physical creativity, we can be sure that this is something we're going to rest from on Shabbos. And therefore, when we think of Shabbos, we often think about the don'ts, what we refrain from. But that's only part of the Shabbos story. Because the Shabbos story is described numerous times in the Torah. But one of the most important places is clearly in the Aseret HaDibrot, in the Ten Commandments. There in the Ten Commandments it says that not only do you observe the Shabbos, but you do something, et Yom HaShabbat LeKodsho, you do something in order to sanctify the Shabbos. The question is, what do you do? So if you look in the Torah, it's fascinating. The Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, are mentioned twice in the Torah. And each time, a different word is used. The first time the Ten Commandments are mentioned in the Torah, the word used is Zachor. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat LeKodsho. Remember, anticipate, get excited in order to sanctify the day of Shabbos. However, the second time that the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, appear in the Torah, a different word is used. The word is Shamor. Guard, safeguard. Make sure it's not trampled over. What's the difference between these two terms? Explains the Ramban Nachmanides. The difference is as follows. Zachor refers to all the positive commandments of Shabbos. All those things that we do in order to transform Shabbos and make it so special. The special Kiddush that we recite. The special meals that we have. That's all included in Zachor. The remembering, the anticipation. Shamor refers to the safeguarding, what we refrain from. We have a diamond. And the diamond is something you protect. You ensure that you will not do anything that will harm that diamond. And therefore, the Shabbos day, this holy day, we ensure that we will not perform activities that will desecrate this holiness of Shabbos. And therefore, says the Ramban, the reason why the Torah uses two different words is because there are two aspects of Shabbos that we must always keep in mind. The Zachor, the mitzvot aseh, the positive commandments of Shabbos, and Shamor, the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, those things that we refrain from on Shabbos. And therefore Shabbos has both Zachor, do's, and Shamor, don'ts. The question is, what is more important? Which aspect of Shabbos is most important? Is it the Zachor, the do's of Shabbos, or Shamor, the don'ts of Shabbos? I'd even ask you, by a show of hands, if you think Zachor, the do's of Shabbos, the special acts we do on Shabbos, are the most important element of Shabbos, raise your right hand. If you think Shamor, the don'ts, the things we refrain from on Shabbos, are the most important part of Shabbos, raise your left hand. It doesn't look like everyone participated. What do you think the right answer is? Double participation. Because it's not either or, it's both. But how do we know it's both? So the fourth source on the page explain the sages. Why is it that it says one Zachor and one Shamor? What did God say on Mount Sinai? It says he said them both, but not only both, simultaneously. Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad ne'emru. These two words were said in a miraculous fashion simultaneously. That's how we begin Lecha Dodi, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. These two words were said simultaneously because that underscores what Shabbos is all about. Shabbos is a day where through our refraining from the weekday creative activity, we're able to focus in its place on the dues of Shabbos. And the reason this is so essential because if we in the Zomet Institute recognize a need that might be able to be addressed by modifying technology, we're going to have to be asking two questions at all points. Question number one is going to be the question of Shamor. Can we be Shomer Shabbos with this device? Can we make sure to create the device in a way where we will not violate any of the don'ts in the operation of this device? But even if we find a way to operate the device without the don'ts, question two becomes the do's. Is this appropriate for Shabbos? Is this going to enhance the Shabbos experience or detract from it? Only if we're able to give an affirmative response to both of those questions, we can be Shomer Shabbos with this device, and we can be Zocher Shabbos. We're going to actually enhance the observance of Shabbos through this device. But then the question becomes, Well, is that really true? Think about the various technological needs. Maybe we could have a beautiful Shabbos without them. One of the things that Zomet Institute does is it makes electric wheelchairs for people who are limited in mobility. There are various devices that come to our attention by certain people who need throughout the week. And you'll find many people will say, maybe it's not necessary. Are they necessary or not? That's one of the things we're going to investigate. Because besides these two fundamental pillars of what Shabbos observance is all about, Zachor and Shamor, there are two other terms, two other mitzvot that appear not in the Torah itself, but in the Navi, in the prophet. The prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu, Navi tells us, Vikarata l'Shabbat oneg. You should call the Shabbos a day of delight. Look. Uchvod Hashem, Ukdosh Hashem mechubad. And the sanctified day of God should be honored. This is the basis for two additional mitzvot. The mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, enjoying the Shabbos experience. And the mitzvah of Kavod Shabbos, preparing. The Shabbos queen is coming to our home. We are going to want our home to radiate beauty. And if you think about it, electrical appliances technology are going to be able to enhance our physical enjoyment of Shabbos. We're going to be able to set the temperature in our homes, in our shuls, to the exact temperature we would like. We're going to be able to have hot food with ease, much easier than it was generations ago. We're going to be able to beautify our homes, make it fit for the Shabbos queen. How important are these two mitzvot that appear in the prophet? So if you look at the third source, the Rambam Maimonides concludes the final chapter of his 30-chapter work on the laws of Shabbos by stating there are four fundamental elements of Shabbos observance. Two of them, he says, are explicit in the Torah. We already know what they are, Zachor and Shamor. Safeguarding Shabbos, not doing the don'ts, and Zachor, remembering, anticipating, focusing on the do's. But he says there are another two that are explicated by the prophet. The prophet did not introduce them, the prophet just made it clear what from the Torah you might have overlooked. And those are the two mitzvot of kavod va'onim, of beautifying and enjoying the Shabbos experience. And therefore, what we're going to have to understand is how do we maximize the beauty and enjoyment of Shabbos within the framework of Zachor v'Shamor, ensuring that we are not doing any activity that would be this creative activity we refrain from on Shabbos, and secondly, doing it in a way where the spirit of Shabbos is always maintained. So with that in mind, we have to think about what is electricity all about? Without going into the specific basis for our refraining from using electrical appliances on Shabbos. That's something we focus on if you would visit the Zomet Institute. But think about it. Electrical appliances are the modern form of fire. Fire, refraining from kindling a fire on the Sabbath, is the one malacha, the one creative transformative activity that is explicitly mentioned in the Torah. Why would that be? So Rav Hirsch mentions, because think about what fire is. Fire is something that mankind recognizes its dangers, but uses as a means of production. Animals are afraid of fire. How does mankind survive in the jungle? There are lions and tigers and bears. What can you do? You just light a fire and you could go to sleep because the lion will be afraid. Fire is something that mankind understands how to harness to be able to advance his needs despite the dangers that it has. And therefore, Rav Hirsch, based upon his definition of malacha that we saw before, says that fire is the means of production. It's what makes mankind creative. If you think about it, fire was always used as a means of production until 1879, when Thomas Edison started marketing the incandescent light bulb. Incandescent light bulb, a burning hot light bulb. It itself is classified as fire, but not all electrical appliances are. But all electrical appliances all have a means of production. The use of the intelligent means of mankind to create and transform. And therefore, we're going to refrain from turning on and turning off all electrical appliances on Shabbos. That is Shomer Shabbos. That's how we're going to observe the Shabbos. But Shabbos is much more than just refraining. Shabbos is ensuring that the entire Shabbos experience is achieved. And the question is what that calls for. So if you think about it, one of the needs that is a clear need on Shabbos is medical and security needs. How does the Torah address fulfilling the medical and security needs of individuals and communities on Shabbos? So the Torah goes out of its way in last week's Parsha, what we read yesterday, describes the purpose of all the mitzvot, the purpose of all the divine commandments. The purpose is Asher Ya'aseh Otam Adam V'chai Bahem. Mankind is supposed to live by the mitzvot of God, live by God's commandments and not die by them. And therefore, barring the three cardinal sins, when it comes to observance of a mitzvah that will bring about the early death of an individual, the Torah says, save the life of an individual. Push off the observance of the mitzvah, even if that mitzvah is Shabbos. And therefore, it's clear that when it comes to life and death situations, we are going to do whatever it takes to save a life on Shabbos. Now you'll say, well, if this is true, who needs the Zomet Institute? Why does the Zomet Institute provide security materials? Why does it apply things for hospitals and the like? After all, this is life and death. If it's life and death, who needs the Zomet Institute? The response is essentially on two levels. Level number one is that many of the devices that we will create are going to help individuals even when it's not a life and death situation. Even if it's a situation of someone who's defined as sick, but not necessarily a threat to their life. And therefore, if we're able to make certain of these modifications in technology, we're going to be able to help these individuals as well by creating devices in a way where there's no violation of Shabbos and therefore nothing to worry about. But the truth is even more than that. And the truth, I'm going to try a little experiment with what looks to me to be the youngest person here.
He's the youngest.
Oh.
There you go.
Who's the youngest?
No, you're the youngest.
You're the youngest. Okay, don't worry. We're not putting you on the spot, but hopefully you'll be okay. Do you like chocolate?
Depends.
Is there a chocolate that you like?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's say we would give you your favorite chocolate bar. And we would say this chocolate bar is all yours. It's a gift. On one condition. The condition is that when you walk out on the street, the first person that you see on the street, give them a part of your candy bar. Now you determine how much you want to give. You could give them a little piece. You could give them the whole thing. You just got your favorite candy bar as a gift. How much do you think you'd give that person?
Well, it depends if I like them.
You don't know them. Huh?
I don't know. Maybe a row.
A row. A tremendously righteous individual we have in front of
Or
us.
maybe less.
Why?
Or maybe
Big-
less.
Maybe less. Okay. Because the average individual will not even give a row. How much would they give? Something closer to a square. Why? It's not because we don't have righteous children. It's because if we have something that we like and it's given to us as a gift and we have to give up part of it, how much are we going to want to give up? A little bit. Only a little bit. And the reason why this is important, because halacha recognizes that if we like Shabbos, or even love Shabbos, and we recognize that it's a gift that was given to us, even in situations that call for violating Shabbos, in order to save a life, how much are we going to want to violate? As little as possible. If we could have our candy bar and eat it, we could have our Shabbos while saving lives, that will be the ideal. And therefore, if we're able to create technology that will enable us to observe Shabbos, while at the same time saving lives, that will be an ideal. But I'll tell you even more so. I'll tell you a story. One of the people who worked in the Zomet Institute, so they had a check from a foreign country, a European country, which was a rare check. And therefore, this individual who lived in Ramat Beit Shemesh, he wanted to cash the check. So he found that the only person who really deals with checks from this country, not even the banks, was a certain chassid by a faction of chassidim known as a Toldos Aaron chassid. Toldos Aaron is known to be a very right-wing chassidus. And therefore, this individual was a little afraid that if this Toldos Aaron chassid found out that he worked in the Zomet Institute, he might not be so willing to give him such a good rate on this thing. Partly because the Zomet Institute, as we'll see, does not only for medical and security needs, but for other needs as well, we modify technology. So he went to this individual to cash the check, and they started a little bit of a conversation. And the chassid asked him, so what do you do? Where do you work? So at that point he had two choices. The truth or not the truth. And he chose to go. He said, you want to know what? Go with the truth. I work in the Zomet Institute. The Toldos Aaron chassid looks at him and says, you work in the Zomet Institute? I'm going to give you the exact rate that I get. I do not want to make a cent off of you. He was stunned. He said, what do you mean? I thought you'd hate me. What's going on? He said, you don't understand. My wife was in the hospital for 3 months. And at first, the only thing throughout the week that gave her any sense of enjoyment, any sense of hope of ever getting better, was the time that they allowed her to walk around the hospital ward. He said, but then Shabbos came, and she thought she was going to be bedbound all of Shabbos. She wasn't going to be able to move around. And therefore, she was very down. And then she saw a Zomet device in the hospital, which would allow her to be able to move around and take the necessary equipment, necessary medical equipment that she had with her everywhere she needed to go. And he said, that equipment completely changed my wife's perspective on her illness and helped her get healed. And therefore, I credit you with my wife's health. And because of that, you better believe that I am going to do whatever I can in order to help you who work in the Zomet Institute. What the Zomet Institute has found is many of these modifications not only enable life and death situations to be met without Shabbos violation, but help people who are in extreme medical conditions to be able to do things that they otherwise would not be able to do. And in fact, halacha says that even when saving lives, do whatever you can to observe Shabbos and save lives simultaneously. And therefore, that which we do to modify technology for the use of medical and security concerns is not all that novel. Everyone recognizes the need. The question is how to do it properly. But here is where the Zomet Institute does something even more novel. We make devices even for the handicapped and disabled. For instance, we make Shabbos electric wheelchairs, Shabbos electric scooters. Now this is going to help individuals who otherwise would be stuck at home or in a different place. But at first glance, these don't seem to be issues of life and death. And therefore, many might question, is this really appropriate for Shabbos? Even if we find a way to modify these devices, these are devices that are going to have to operate on Shabbos itself. So you might say, well, this is what we learned about Oneg Shabbos. The prophet told us the importance of enjoying the Shabbos experience. But that alone is not enough. And the reason that's not enough is we do many things to enjoy the Shabbos experience. We probably put up in advance of Shabbos when we think we'll be cold, something to have hot water, something to have hot food. That's something we do, but that's all done in advance of Shabbos. Some of these devices, they have to be operated on Shabbos itself. And therefore, if they have to be operated on Shabbos itself, even if they'll be done in a unique fashion, is that really appropriate? That's not only a question that you might entertain, that's a question that we in the Zomet Institute ourselves entertain. Because the person who pushed us to make these devices was none other than the great sage Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, a blessed man. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, when it comes, was recognized as a great Torah sage in all areas of Jewish law, but specifically in Hilchot Shabbat. In the laws of Shabbos, he was known to be unparalleled. And if you look in page 3, you'll see a description in English of a story where Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach called up Rav Rosen, the founder of the Zomet Institute, and he says, I need you to find a way to make electric wheelchairs for Shabbos. We wondered why. Again, even if it's going to help people enjoy Shabbos, is that really appropriate? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach took Rav Rosen to the home of a little girl who was wheelchair bound, who asked, I need your help in order to be able to go to the synagogue on Shabbos. You could have said, one day a week you won't go to the synagogue. But that's not what Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said, we're going to search to find a way to be able to do so. Why? So, give a little background. It's a little hard to see, both because it's small and it's not in color. But you'll see two pictures near the bottom of page 3 on the left side. The first is about a little 8-year-old girl named Shira. Shira described to us how her life dramatically changed after her electric wheelchair was equipped with Shabbos mode from the Zomet Institute. She said beforehand, she was stuck at home all of Shabbos. And when her mother used to light candles, she used to feel like a stone, a rock. She knew for the next 24 hours plus, she was staying at home. And Shabbos was extremely difficult. But she said that all changed. And Shabbos became the highlight of her week after her electric wheelchair was equipped with Shabbos mode. Because now she could go around pushing her baby carriage. She could go to shul, to children's groups. But her favorite thing is where she lived, there were no cars on the street on Shabbos. And therefore, the streets were wide open. And the girls on the block would have these massive games of jump rope. And she could never play jump rope with them. She would look outside her window. There was no one to push her around. She would look outside her window. She would hear the giggling and hear the playing. But she could never join. But now that she has Shabbos mode on her electric wheelchair, she could go all by herself with her electric wheelchair out into the street and play jump rope with all the rest of the girls on the block. And that was the highlight of her week. You might be perplexed. You might be wondering, if she's in an electric wheelchair, how she play jump rope? Anyone want to guess? Very good. She doesn't jump. She's the twirler of the rope. Now, for most people, being the twirler of the rope is not all that great. But for her, who knew the only way that she could be a part of this group of girls was to be that twirler, that transformed her Shabbos. Said Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, if there is a way to transform the experience of Shabbos from feeling like a rock to feeling like the queen of the world, if there's a way, we have to find it. And he went even further. He said, this will also save lives. That second picture there, it's very hard to see. There's no way to see it. But Dr. Tannenbaum from Montreal, Canada. Dr. Tannenbaum was suffering from cancer of the vocal cords. And because of that, he had no way of speaking audibly without using a personal voice amplifier. And he asked us, is there any way to modify this device for use on Shabbos that people could hear him on Shabbos? We worked on it, and thank God we were able to find a way. And about a year later, Dr. Tannenbaum sends us a letter with a box. In the letter he says as follows. He says, I'm a doctor. And every medical doctor knows that the way a patient feels about their medical condition has a major impact on their ability to heal. He said, what you gave me by giving me the gift of speech on Shabbos is worth more than 1,000 medical prescriptions. He said, because of your device, I beat all the odds. The doctors thought there was no hope. But you gave me the gift of Shabbos. And the gift of Shabbos healed me. Because instead of a day to think about how sick I am, I was able to enjoy Shabbos to the utmost. And he said, because of that, in this box I'm returning the device to you. Because thank God I'm already healed. I don't need it anymore. And I want other people to make use of that same technology. What Dr. Tannenbaum taught us, is exactly what Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach instructed us. He said, if you're going to create devices that are going to give the Shabbos experience to people who are otherwise handicapped, disabled, or limited, you will save lives. And therefore, if there's a way, you have to fund it. And here's where Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's outlook on life essentially transformed what we do in the Zomet Institute. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the way I understand it, viewed technological advancement from a realistic standpoint. He knew that if technology allows us with ease to do things that we could not do in the past. So therefore, being overly restrictive and saying, even though this is permitted, maybe it's not proper, is going to put us in an untenable situation. Because in the olden days, they didn't build so many buildings that were so high. Because there weren't elevators. But the moment you have elevators, people start building bigger buildings. And not only do they start building bigger buildings, but there are certain places where it's only financially viable to build if you're going to be able to build buildings that are a certain height. There are certain areas in Israel, in order to build, you need to knock down mountains. It costs a tremendous amount of money. And therefore, in order to make it financially viable, you need taller buildings. So he said, what happens if there's a way to build a Shabbos elevator, but we decide to refrain, way to build it properly, but we decide to refrain from doing so because at first glance we feel a little bit uncomfortable. Then what's going to happen when the time will come where the only way to build is to build up? So we basically be given a couple of options. Either only on the lower floors, are we going to have Jews? On the upper floors, we're going to have non-Jews. We wouldn't want it to be that on the upper floors, there are non-Shabbos observant individuals. But what would you do in the religious communities where there are no non-religious Jews, let alone non-Jews? What are you going to do? You're not going to be able to build those buildings. And therefore, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach advanced, if something is really permitted, and we found a way to do so, we have to modify it technologically. That is going to help enhance the Shabbos experience and not detract from it. For instance, Rav Rosen, who passed away, who started the Zomet Institute, his brother is a little older than him, is a well-known Rosh Yeshiva, a well-known leader of a very right-wing Haredi yeshiva, as they're called, in Israel. And he described when he eulogized his brother at his brother's funeral, he described that he said only recently, when his son-in-law was in the hospital, did he realize to what degree his brother made an impact on all of Israeli society, even beyond merely the religious Jews. He said his son-in-law had a bad accident, and because of that, he was not able to walk. And because he wasn't able to walk, he was in the hospital for a number of weeks. And in the hospital, he couldn't move around. When he went to the synagogue in the hospital, he went to pray in the hospital. When he had to go back to his room, he waited for the Shabbos elevator. He waited for what was only one of the elevators in that particular hospital, which stopped at every floor. And therefore, the elevator took a long time in order to get down to him and then to get to the room that he wanted. And one Shabbos, right at the beginning, he sees a woman who was clear by looking at her that she wasn't religious, partially because of the way that she dressed, but even more so because she came with her motorcycle helmet under her arm, and it was clear that she came to the hospital on the Sabbath driving a motorcycle. But yet she stood there waiting for the Shabbos elevator for a number of minutes as numerous regular elevators passed by. And after a few minutes, she realized that the religious individuals who were waiting for the elevator might be wondering why she's waiting with them. After all, she's not Shabbos observant. And she turned to them and she said, "You're probably wondering why I'm waiting for the Shabbos elevator. But realize I'm Jewish too. I want to do whatever I can." Said, "I'm not ready for full Shabbos observance. But if you would tell me that there's a motorcycle I could ride on Shabbos, I would have come in a motorcycle. But if there's a Shabbos elevator, I'm not going to use it." Now don't worry, we in the Zomet Institute do not make Shabbos motorcycles. That's not in our trajectory. But at the same time, what Rav Yigal Rosen pointed out is he realized that the benefit is way beyond even the religious community. It's even the traditional community and people who want to have as much of a stake in Shabbos as possible, to be able to meet the needs that otherwise they wouldn't have. One of the devices that we make is what's called a grumma device. Without going into the specifics, it's a outlet that will enable turning on certain devices for the sick, the handicapped, and disabled. And recently we had somebody come with his yeshiva, with his advanced study class, and he came for a very advanced description of the various things that's done in the Zomet Institute. And afterwards he approached me and he said that he has a 3-year-old daughter with a major medical condition which requires her to have a feeding tube. And how is he observing Shabbos beforehand? He was told by his Rosh Yeshiva, by the leader of his yeshiva, that in order to do the best way to do would be to make sure you have to do nothing unless it's absolutely necessary on Shabbos. So he understood that to mean that his daughter should be connected to the wall, connected to an outlet all of Shabbos, which essentially meant that in their little home, she was connected at all points to an outlet, which meant they never left their home on Shabbos. They were stuck at home. If they were ever invited out for a meal, they couldn't go. Shabbos was difficult. He said, but when he used to go to his parents' home, what a nice big home, the only way to be able to do so and have his daughter there was his daughter was connected not only to an outlet, she was connected to a 50-meter extension cord, which allowed her to go through the home. 50 meters, approximately 175 feet. That meant that there was an extension cord going throughout the entire house. People would trip on it. It would be a little bit dangerous. He asked me if I had any suggestion. I said, these grumma devices. He said, I think personally that if Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach were here now, he would tell you, take 2 of these grumma devices. And you want to know what? We have a gemach. It's not going to cost you a cent to try these out. 3 months, you could take them for free. See, I think this will completely transform your life. This is saving lives. This is not using an electric wheelchair, which maybe you'd be apprehensive about. This is using something to save a life, to feed someone who's defined as sick, and to be able to completely transform your Shabbos experience. He was a little hesitant at first, but he took these 2 devices. He decided not to use it in his home, but he was going to his parents' home for Shabbos. And when he went to his parents' home, his parents essentially, he asked his parents, I have these devices. Would you prefer that I use them instead of using this long extension cord? He said that his parents said, do whatever you want. We're not going to obligate you to do anything. Do what you feel comfortable with. But he felt that his parents might enjoy it a little bit more if they didn't have this extension cord going throughout the home. And therefore, he used these 2 grumma devices. At the end of Shabbos, his parents came to him and said, we never would have obligated you to use those devices, but the entire Shabbos experience was totally different. He said, it wasn't a burden for us to have you in the home. You could come every week if you use these devices, but make sure next time you come with these 2 devices. So he said, you want to know what? We're going to try to use these devices at home. This is what they call the slippery slope. You know what you may. But here, this was something based upon Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and the like. And he used it at home, and his entire Shabbos experience changed. They were able to go on a walk at home, which was great for his daughter's health. They were able to use a separate suction device that he was hesitant to use initially because the same outlet was being used for the feeding tube. And they were invited out for a meal, and they were able to go for the first time. And his entire Shabbos experience was transformed. And he decided, this is Shamor V'Zachor. This is how I'm going to enjoy Shabbos. So he went hesitatingly to his Rosh Yeshiva, to the leader of his yeshiva, to see what he thought. And he didn't tell him exactly. He asked, what do you think about using grama devices on Shabbos to enhance my Shabbos experience? So the Rosh Yeshiva responded, you want to know what? I don't think there's a problem, but if you could do without them, do without them. He was very disheartened. And he turned to another rabbi in the yeshiva, the leader of the halachic teaching in the yeshiva, the Rosh Kola. And the rabbi said to him, this is not a question for the Rosh Yeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva is a pure angel. He doesn't know what you're going through. He doesn't know what you're suffering on a daily basis. Certainly on Shabbos. And he said, for you, these devices are way beyond what you need to do. They're the ideal. He even went on further that you are a Sephardi. Some are of the opinion that Sephardim grama devices are even can be used without any hesitation. And therefore he said, this is what you should be doing. Enjoy it. This is what the experience is all about. Rav Rosen used to like to say that there are many people who are against what the Zomet Institute does until they know someone who needs it. Once they know someone who needs it and they recognize, we'll answer the question in a moment, and they recognize the need, so then things totally change. Very recently, we had somebody approached us that his neighbor, who was an elder Holocaust survivor, suffering from macular degeneration, which essentially meant that their ability to see, to read, was very difficult to say the least, except using some of these new devices that they have. They use a tremendous amount of light and magnification to allow for seeing. And he said, I see my neighbor during the week learning. He learns Daf Yomi, he learns throughout the day, he's already retired. And when Shabbos comes, he can't even read the prayers of Shabbos. It's extremely difficult. Is there any way you can help modify this device in order to be able to use it on Shabbos? Because he said essentially 6 days of the week he's not blind. And the 7th day he is. That's what Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach taught us. That under those circumstances, to be able to create the technology that will change people's lives, that's what we have to do. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was known as an authority not only on Shabbos, but on Shabbos and electricity. At a very young age, he wrote an entire book about electricity on Shabbos and the various different laws. What caused him to get so involved in the use of electricity? Because his mother required a hearing aid. And hearing aids were relatively new at the time. And his mother asked her son, her young son, who was, very advanced for his age, said, can I use this on Shabbos? And he investigated it at great length. And he felt it was appropriate. And therefore, he said you were allowed to use it. Later, he saw other opinions on the use of electricity who understood differently. But he came in and he said, and he defended the position, and he used his vast knowledge of electricity to understand what it's based on. Yes, a question?
Would you just give a brief definition of the term grama?
Yeah, grama means indirect causation. Indirect causation means that instead of performing a creative activity, you set up a situation where the activity will perform without you doing it. You essentially will achieve a result without doing inaction. It's something that we have special technology in order to achieve. We limit it only to medical and security concerns. It's very limited, and it's only if there's no better option. It's not our preferred method, but any device that cannot be on all of Shabbos and can't be placed on a timer, and it has to be turned on Shabbos, the method of modification that we would use is grama. Again, in the Zomet Institute, we illustrated, we have special devices to show, but for now we'll suffice with the concept that we use. And this is something just in the waning moments of our time, and then anyone who has questions, I'd be glad to field. But part of what we have till 7:45, right? Okay, so we'll just finish one last thought. But essentially, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach also recognized that there might be another reason for hesitation. And that is something we call marit ayin. Sometimes things look in a certain way and people might get the wrong idea. And therefore, Rav Rosen of the Zomet Institute asked Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, what do you say about this? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, we have to make sure that on every device is going to be clear. This device operates in a special way on Shabbos. But he quoted a Talmudic passage in Tractate Avodah Zarah, which says as follows: God was asked, why do you make the sun and the moon if at the time that there were worshippers of idolatry, they worshiped the sun and the moon? And God said, because of fools in the world will I fail to give the world what the world really needs. And Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said the same thing. He said, there are certain things that are necessary, that the opposite is much more dangerous than not doing them. And if technology allows us to do so, and allows us to give people a wonderful Shabbos experience, we have to be very careful to do it in the proper way. We have to be very careful to use the tools that the Torah itself told us to use at this intersection of Torah and technology, but at the same time, we have to be very careful to do it in a way where it's clear this is appropriate. This is done in a special Shabbos way, but at the same time, to recognize that when it's done, that is an essential need of advancing Shabbos and achieving exactly what God wants us to do. And therefore, I thank you for the time. If anyone has questions, definitely if there's, looks like,
Take 2 questions.
2 questions.
How much input did Rav Shlomo Zalman have in the developing of the electric scooter? Did he give ASOS or did he build it first?
He described, from what I understand, this was way before my time, but he described how he thought it could be made halachically, and then the engineers of the Zomet Institute actually did it. But he was shown the scooter and he approved it. Okay, so I thank you for your time, and very impressed with the initiative of the Torah and Technology and learning of wonderful things. Glad to be a small part of it.
Rabbi Zimmerman, and wish you and the Zomet Institute much hatzlacha in your work, and may you be zocha to, as I mentioned at the beginning, to resolve in the maximal way the conflict between modern life and religious life, which really there shouldn't be. We just have to show that that's the case. At this time, we'll daven mincha, and please stay tuned for the next installment.